How I added mod support to my game in Godot in 1 minute. I want the player to be able to drop images into a folder and have those images appear in the game as items. Enable custom user dir and custom user dir name in project settings. Reveal the user data folder in-game by using os shell open and os get user data dir. Create subfolders for the mod files and drop image files inside. Create a new directory object and use open, listDirBegin, getNext, and listDirEnd functions to get a list of the image's file paths. Exclude hidden files in subfolders and only include PNG files. Loop through the list of file paths and display each one as an item by creating a new image object, loading in the file path, creating a new image texture from the image, and setting it as the item's sprite texture. So that's how I did it as an amateur dev. Feel free to comment and let me know how I can improve. And you can stick around for the rest of the video if you want a more detailed explanation. First, let's talk about the user data folder. The user data folder is automatically created by the game, is separate from the game's project files, and is guaranteed to be writable. It's typically used for things like saved game files or saved player settings. Inside the Godot editor, the project files folder is referenced by the relative path res, while the user data folder is referenced by user. By default, the location of the user data folder is inside the Godot data folder, but this location can be changed to the standard application data location by enabling custom user dir in the project settings. So I did this for my game. The standard application data location is where your computer keeps data files related to your apps, separate from the apps themselves. The absolute path of user varies depending on the operating system. Godot documentation has a chart for this. In the Godot editor, the user data folder can be opened by clicking on Project Open User Data Folder in the menu. And in GDScript, os.getUserDataDir is a built-in function that returns the absolute path of user as a string. This is helpful for showing the player exactly where to place the mod files. os.shellOpen is a built-in function that requests the operating system to open an address. It can also be used for things like opening a website URL in the default browser. But in my case, I'm using it to open the user data folder to assist the player. So now I know how to access the user data folder myself, and I've given the player an easy way to find it in their own computer too. It's time to decide how the mod files will be organized. This depends on what the mod does exactly, and what else the user data folder is being used for the game. In my case, I just wanted it to be as simple as possible for the player to use. I've decided that I want the player to create a folder called mods and a subfolder called items. The player can then place image files inside items, and the game will handle the rest. Image files will be loaded into the game as items. Now that I have image files inside my mods folder, I want to access them using GDScript. I create a function to list files in a directory and have it return an array that contains the list of files. I create an empty array called files, which I'll use to hold the list of image files inside the folder. To open the folder, I create a new directory object and use the built-in open function to access the folder. I can print an error message in case this fails. Once the directory is open, I can start listing files inside it with listDirBegin. I use getNext to get each file and add it, along with its path, to my files array. I make sure to exclude hidden files that start with a period and subfolders, and I only include PNG files. The built-in string functions begins with and ends with are really handy for this purpose. When there are no more files left, the loop ends and I close it with listDirEnd. So now my files array contains a list of file paths inside the mod folder. I can then loop through the array. For each image file path, I set up an in-game item and use the image file path as the texture for the sprite. I just have a simple node setup for this demo with a kinetic body 2D containing a sprite and a custom button to make the item movable in-game. If I were using an image file from inside my project files, I could just load the file path directly as the sprite's texture and that will work fine. But that doesn't work for files inside the user data folder. So to make this work, I have to create a new image object first, load the file path into it, and then create a new image texture from that image, and then assign that texture to the sprite. That's basically it. A lot more can still be added to make this system more foolproof. Here are a couple of examples. I've added filters to the function that lists the image file paths in order to exclude file names that contain special characters and images that are bigger than 64 pixels square. For checking for special characters, I have an array listing the characters I want to exclude, and then I check each file name against it. For checking the image size, I have a function for getting the image size by loading the file path into an image object and using the getSize function. And then I have a function for checking the size against my specified limits. The image size check has to be placed separately here, after all the other conditions have been met, to make sure that this check is only done on the PNG image files. So that's my very basic mod support for my Godot game. If you've also added mod support to yours, I'd love to hear about how you did it, or if you have recommendations for tutorials or resources you found helpful. Lastly, just in case you want to see how I made the items movable, here's the tiny script for my custom button class. It just connects the button up and button down signals via code, and that controls whether or not the item is moving. The movement is just a lerp in the process function. It could actually be as simple as just equating the item's position with a cursor position, but I like using lerp to make the items look like they have a bit of weight. The item that the button will move is assigned by the onReady variable. For my demo, it's just the parent node of the button. This demo is a simplified version of what I implemented in my game, Pocket Kitten. I think maybe the most tedious part of implementation was making sure that the mods would play well with saving and loading. For Pocket Kitten, I made sure that saved games using mod files can only be loaded if the mod files are still there. In case the mod files have been renamed or removed, the Save Load panel lists the missing mod files. Thanks for watching! You can follow my game dev work at mellowminx.itch.io or on Twitter at mellow_minx. If you have any feedback for how I can improve, I'd love to learn from you.